Hey friends, Kevin here, and today we're going to talk about all of the minivans that Toyota has sold in North America. I'm going to limit this to the United States, although Canada should be pretty close. Now, before I have 45 people correct me on this, Toyota sold a few vans here and there that got imported in the United States from the late 70s into the 80s. They're very rare, and they're not true minivans. So let's just kick that out of the equation. Toyota didn't start over here with minivans until 1990 with the Previa. Some people say Previa, but we're going to go with Previa, which was sold from 1990 to 1997. This thing was actually made in Japan, and it was an oddball vehicle in that, one, it was slightly smaller than a normal minivan. That automatically is a knock against it. And the second thing being that it is rear-wheel drive, and instead of an engine in the front, the engine is more towards the middle, a mid-engine vehicle. So if you want to check the oil or something, you have to get out, lift the driver's seat up out of the way, pull a panel back to kind of get to that part of the engine to check anything. There's knock number two. Now, for someone that's very mechanically inclined and knows a lot about automobiles, if they want to mess with something like that, that's fine. For the person starting off with van life and doing their van build for the first time, something they're going to use and need to be dependable, when you get into anything rare, when you get into anything oddball, like I covered some in this video here earlier, it's going to be harder for you when you're in a strange place to find someone that actually knows how to work on it. The parts are going to cost you more. They're going to be harder to find. It's just not the type of choice that someone starting out new that's not very mechanical and able to do these things themselves should be taking on. In addition, knock number three for the Previa is in the crash ratings test, it did pretty poorly. So it just didn't have a lot going for it. Knock number four, it was underpowered because it was made in Japan, it was made for that market, and they kind of modified it and dumped it over here. So after the first few years, in order to get the power ratings up to comparable other brands, what they did was they stuck a turbocharger on it. Some people call that a supercharger. I'm going to break this down if you're not real mechanically inclined. What this does is basically it takes and compresses air, forces it into the engine, and creates a little more power out of a smaller engine. While that part's great, vehicles that had turbochargers in the 80s and the 90s tended to also have them fail, usually within 60 or 70,000 miles. Again, not something you want to be dealing with on an older vehicle. And when you have the word turbocharger failure replacement, you're talking about $1,000 for the part plus labor. So this is 4 or 5 reasons already. We can stop there. Again, a Previa is not what you want if you're looking for a Toyota vehicle to use for your minivan camper build out. That brings us up to the one you've probably heard of, which is called a Sienna, because the Sienna has been sold here since 1998 all the way up until today. So there's 4 generations of Sienna minivans. There's one generation, however, that you're going to want to avoid. If you have owned any of these Toyota Siennas or the Previa over the years, even if it was years ago before you got into the camping van life thing with it, that's okay. But let us know what year, what model of these you had, and what kind of luck you had out of it, and any problems that you may have had out of it. And that will help other people that are shopping and thinking about using one of these for their own van build. So let's get into the history of these. The Sienna was designed by Toyota here and was actually built by Toyota here. The first generation was built in Kentucky. The other generation since then have been built at a plant in Indiana. The first generation of these, which went from 98 to 2003, and by the way, all Siennas are engine in the front and front wheel drive. But the first generation had a 3-liter V6 Toyota engine that was used in some of their other vehicles, and these engines had problems. When you look this stuff up, they refer to it as a sludge problem. And what happened is the holes between the head and the block for the oil to move through simply weren't big enough, which made them more likely to clog up. When you don't have oil able to circulate through your engine properly, you're going to have engine failure. This was a big problem in the late 90s and early 2000s for Toyota. It gave them a pretty good black eye. There were a lot of lawsuits that went on over these engine failures. So this first generation that has this engine, again, the models from 98 to 2003, you want to avoid. You will still find them out there for sale. There's some of them still running. You'll run into some low mileage ones. But again, if you want reliability, you don't want the first generation of these Sienna minivans. That brings us up to the stuff that came after that. You have the second generation that went from 2004 to 2010. You have a third generation that went from model years 2011 to 2020. And you have a fourth generation now coming out in 2021. Now, this 2021 model that's coming out, the first of the fourth generation Toyota Sienna, you know what's great about it? It comes standard with 18, count them, 18 cup holders. For those working from a budget and can live without having 18 cup holders built into their minivan, you may want to consider one of the older models. Of course, these are going to be pretty similar except for upgrades through the years. They didn't have the engine problems. They had better crash ratings, pretty good crash ratings compared to that first generation Sienna. So again, avoid the first one. If you're after a Sienna, you want something from 2004 forward. It's really that simple. Also, for someone that wants an all-wheel drive minivan to do their camper build with, and I did a video on whether you really need it. Some people do, some don't. But if that's what you're after, from this second generation forward, Toyota made all-wheel drive versions of this. And there were a lot of years here in the United States that if you wanted an all-wheel drive minivan, the Toyota Sienna was your only choice. And while Toyota has a reputation for reliability, at least on the ones from 2004 and up, the other thing you can count on is you're going to pay a premium to buy a Toyota of the same year compared to some of the other brands that you can pick up. So you have to be the one to make that decision of, is it worth paying thousands of dollars more? Are you a believer in that reliability compared to some of the other brands from a similar year with the same mileage in the same condition that you could potentially purchase cheaper? So I hope you found that useful. I hope you know now which ones that you want to consider and which ones you definitely want to avoid when it comes to Toyota minivans being used for a minivan build out, making a camper van out of it. Because if you're going to be on the road, you're going to potentially be in a lot of strange places where you're going to be at the mercy of the local mechanics. You want to put the odds as much as you can in your favor. So stick with that 2004 and up. If you like this series, let me know down in the comments. Hey, Kevin, I want to see more of these on other brands. Because there's other brands like the Chrysler stuff and Honda stuff and a lot of other minivans to cover. And if you want me to do a series of these on full size, what a lot of people call cargo vans for all these brands. And I'm going to try to roll these out if this is what you want to see, and try to roll one of these out every week or so, mixed in with the other stuff we do concerning van life and travel.